Hi folks, Andy here. So it's been a little while since I've done some of these reviews, just been busy with life. Um, Back to the Richard Laymon, just desperately want to get through this list. We're on to number 15 now, so I've still got 15 books to talk about. And at number 15, after a really good think about this, because some of these books have been swapping and chopping and changing, I've got a bit of a surprise one here at number 15 because this is actually a fan favourite. I mean, to be honest, all these are fan favourites, but this one I've chosen at number 15 because I do like some of it a lot. Some of this is great, but some of this isn't as great. And whilst I think it's a good book, it's not the classic that I think some people think it is, even though I like it. I'll try and make it more clear as we go through. So that at number 15 is Darkness Tell Us from 1991, which is the Ouija board book. Great cover by Steve Crisp. And this one has so much about it that I really, really like. And I'm going to try and keep this review a bit shorter because battery's quite poor on this phone at the moment. So this is the one where you've got a group of kids that steal a Ouija board from a professor and then run off to the woods, to the mountains, in search of a promise of treasure that the ghost that they've contacted, called Butler, has promised them. And they have every reason to believe in what Butler's saying because Butler has proven that they know things that no living person could know and has interacted with them in this weird cryptic fashion and has basically promised them riches and fortunes if they go to where it's telling them to go to. And you've also got this professor who finds out that these kids have stole this board and she goes after the kids to try and get them back. And she's got a romantic love interest, which is, I think, the brother of her dead husband, who she hasn't seen him for years, but he just turns up at her house, and within minutes they're having sex and they form a relationship. And her husband's forgotten about because it transpires she didn't like him much anyway. And always liked his brother. Just typical Richard Laymon, very, very shallow characterisation here. Just stuff to throw in so they can have sex and stuff, which is something that Laymon did a lot. But anyway, ignoring all of that, you've got these two stories with the kids off into the woods and this professor and her boyfriend now after them. And yeah, it's a bit of a mad one because the professor and her boyfriend, who are the adults of this story, literally every 5 minutes they're stopping what they're doing just so they can have sex, just so that Laymon could get sex scenes in the book. They don't feel like adults; they're like horny teenagers throughout the whole thing. The teenagers behave more like adults. Only it's a weird group in which none of them seem to really like each other. There's one in particular, this girl who is always sort of described as the frumpy one, and she doesn't seem to like anybody else in this group, and nobody else seems to like her. And I'm thinking, why are these people friends? They just don't act like friends would. They don't seem to have any sort of friendship here. They're all constantly jibing with each other, mocking each other. And our main hero is another sort of semi-Rupert in that his heart's in the right place. He falls in love with this girl called Angela, who's very important to the story, and she's meek and downtrodden. He falls in love with her, but he's also lusting after all the other girls, as well as this professor. And there's one bit where one girl gets attacked and she's almost dead, and all he's thinking about is sex. And there's a really funny bit towards the end where he decides to have sex with his girlfriend, and initially he sees the face of the professor. But then she goes and his girlfriend's face appears and he knows she's the one for him then because she's now become his sexual fantasy. It's so stupid, but it's something that, Laymon did, and you either like it or you don't, and sometimes it is funny. The thing I like about this book, and I haven't really said a lot of positive stuff about this, I love the premise of the Ouija board and setting out into the woods. Laymon wrote woods brilliantly. This is it's the third book he did where it was mainly set in the woods, but this was his second best book about the woods. There's one he's wrote that I believe is better that I'll get to, but the way in which he described it, despite the fact that Laymon doesn't really do characterisation, he doesn't do a lot of description, the way in which he writes the scenes of the woods and the location, the mountains, the streams, it's very minimalist, but it's very descriptive at the same time, and it's just the right amount of words, and it works. And here it just feels very evocative, very picturesque, very atmospheric, and I really like it. I love the scenery and the world world building that Laymon does here. It's also very fast paced, lots of action. There's this crazy skinhead muscle man sex maniac running around the woods. There would be, it's Laymon, isn't it? And it's a really interesting villain in that where he's come from and why he's there, God knows. But he's just he's a major threat to the kids, and he turns up quite a few times, and the scenes with him are quite tense and quite exciting. There's a lot of good action in this, and the scenes involving Butler the Spirit and what goes on with that is also really interesting, and it builds. It's got a central mystery that builds and builds, and that carries the story on and on and on. Despite the fact that this is a large book, it's about 500 pages long. It's very minimalistic in writing. It's simple sentences and simple paragraphs and monotone, an internal monologue and dialogue, but very basic. It's very fast paced. This is probably the fastest 500-page book that Laymon wrote in terms of how simple the writing is, and how sort of picturesque and scenic the writing is as well. And I think that for 90% of this book, it probably would have scored higher up on this list because I really enjoyed it. My issues with the book come in the final few chapters, the revelation as to who Butler really is and what they're really after, as well as the stuff involving Angela's family and the way in which it literally disposes of half the kids in a single moment of action, which is very visceral, I guess shocking, but it kind of just feels very underwritten. It just happens and half the characters just die in one scene, which is just, it just seems like a bit of a waste, really. I'm guessing that Laymon's trying to throw in the shock of it, but it doesn't work as well for me. The revelation of who Butler is, though, really got to me because of the fact that if they had announced who they were from the start, and I'm not going to spoil who they are, but had they announced who they were from the start and what they actually wanted, so much of this story would have been so different. I mean, I guess we wouldn't have had a story in that sense, but it comes across that this spirit character is so selfish and one-dimensional and hasn't thought that there was a much better way of just doing all this stuff, because it could have been resolved in which none of these characters died, and it just feels, especially considering some of the things they make characters do, when the revelation of who they actually are comes to pass, it's kind of like, why did you do that? Why didn't you just go about this a different way entirely? You would have saved so much time and effort, and it just didn't feel very well written to me, that bit, as well as the ending in which, without spoiling any major part of the story, when certain characters do come away with money, there's a bit at the end in which they basically give portions of the money away to the families of the kids who would have got them. So the people who die, their parents basically get money. And I've seen it elsewhere before said in a brilliant way, and I'm just going to try and paraphrase what they said, in that, what did these checks say? Sorry your kid's dead, but here's 10 grand. Because this is what they would have got. It's just, it's supposed to be kind of like characters doing the right thing, but it just comes across as like really dumb and weird. It just would have been better not to sent them at all or had any contact, because it's just, these bodies are never going to be discovered and all sorts. It's just, yeah, it's a bit underwritten. So the ending I found was massively underwhelming, a bit frustrating and a bit ridiculous, and it did reduce my enjoyment of the overall story, because it's a 500-page book. I know it's a fast-paced one, but you're reading so much story and it's so well written that the ending for me just felt flat. In saying that, I still vividly remember so much about this book, and there's so much imagery that sticks with me. The woods themselves, the treks, the streams, the mountains, that crazy psycho, that I loved, that I really enjoyed, and that have stayed with me. Even now I can vividly picture it, and for that reason this is still number 15 of my favourite Richard Laymon books. I think it's a good book, very fast paced, lots of action. I just think it could have been great, and I think I've put it down at 15 because I'm frustrated that, whereas other people probably would say this is a better book than 15th place, the way in which it all resolves did bring it down for me just enough so that I can't say I love it, I just like it. But mileage may vary. You may like it more than me. You may not find that ending as frustrating as I did. And that's great. If you can enjoy this book more than I did, fair play to you. I wanted to like it more, and I think what really gets to me is, as with, and I'm going to wrap this up, as with Blood Games and this were two books that I remember reading 25 years ago or so, and really, really vividly remember loving them. So coming back, they were two books that I was convinced were going to be, easily top 10, maybe even top 5 Laymon books. And I'm quite shocked that they're not on reread, and where I've put them now, how I feel about them now. Still enjoying them, but not loving them. So that's Darkness Tell Us at number 15 on my Richard Laymon list. And yeah, a good book with a brilliant premise, great story, disappointing finale. But you may not agree with that. You might like it a lot more than me. And some people I know have put this in their top 10, top 5. Kind of wish it had appeared, but there's just 14 books I like more. So that's Darkness Tell Us.